biggest advocates of liberty. Those famous libertarians, most of them are devout Christians. Ron Paul, Rand Paul, Judge Andrew Napolitano. You could go back to Ludwig von Mises. I mean, you know, across the board, Justin Amash, Thomas Massey. So it's not true, but that perception's out there. We've got some gentlemen with us here today that represent different faiths or different parts of faith, or however you want to put it. I'm going to introduce them and let them make statements. We're going to have a conversation about this subject here today. First is, and I'll probably get his name wrong, Justin Machacek? Machacek. I knew I was not going to get that right. He is a four-time Emmy Award-winning television producer of 15 years, an independent faith-based filmmaker. He serves as the chief executive of the American Liberty Association, which was established to provide a platform for individuals who believe in Judeo-Christian values and libertarian political philosophy. We also have Mr. Will Coley, who is a longtime activist in the Tea Party movement, a former co-host of the Tea Party Patriots Live in Orlando. He gives lectures on Islamic history, interfaith relations, and Islamic law, and is the director of Muslims for Liberty. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Jeremy Ashton, who is a homeschooling father of four and the founder of LDS Liberty. I think we're going to start with Justin and move to Will and then down to Jeremy. If you'd like to tell us a little bit about your organizations and get the conversation going.
Sure. The American Liberty Association is...
I need to speak up.
Sure. The American Liberty Association is a brand new organization. We're just in our infancy. We're about 8 weeks in now. It was created to fill the void and to educate people of faith and to reach out to an evangelical and Catholic and basically any person that believes in biblical values and the values of the Bible. We want to have those values represented, but not the religion be the key focus. So we're trying to reach Judeo-Christians with the message of libertarian political philosophy, and we want to do that through education. We believe that society will be a better place when people understand those, and we can have free markets, and we'll all be prosperous and free to live.
Okay, Will?
I work with Muslims for Liberty. Our group is also a fairly new organization. We've been around for about 2.5 to 3 years. I've been doing this work for about 5 years now, and what we do is we study Islamic history and Islamic legal theory, and we found the correlative values between libertarianism and values that have sometimes originated in Islamic legal theory, like the presumption of innocence and the right to a trial, and other legal doctrines that have existed in the Muslim world for over 1,400 years, but unfortunately don't really exist there today. And we educate both the Muslim community on these values, try to reintroduce these values to the Muslim community, and we also do outreach to create dialogue between the conservative and the liberty community and the Muslim community, so that we can bridge build and bring understanding between these two communities. Through this work, we've got chapters in 7 states now. We have people that are translating our works in Pakistan and that are disseminating our writings in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Malaysia, in Australia, and we're growing every day. We have people that used to work for us that are now working in Saudi Arabia. So the message is getting out there. It's taking a little bit of time, but I think that if we keep plugging at it, it can eventually be a global movement.
Jeremy?
Okay, so I'm Jeremy Ashton. I'm the founder of LDS Liberty. LDS Liberty is dedicated to advancing the cause of liberty, similar to them, but specifically within the LDS faith, or the Mormon faith. And a couple years ago, as I started studying the principles of liberty, became awakened to it around the time of the first Ron Paul campaign. I went back and I studied past leaders of our church. I realized that there is a very strong tradition within our church of, and that it is a key component of our faith. But then as I looked around, I realized I had never heard a lot of these things growing up, and a lot of other Latter-day Saints weren't believing them either. We had 2 Latter-day Saint candidates for president this last election, and neither of them represented the principles of liberty very well. So I took the mission upon to go out and to start educating those in my faith on the principles of liberty and how it does tie directly to our religion and the things that we believe.
Well, the questions, we'll get some questions from you too. I want to start with, I think, which is one of the biggest ones. We're at the Republican Liberty caucus convention, which means we're working within the Republican Party with liberty-minded people or libertarians. Justin, this question is for you. Obviously, a large component of the Republican base are evangelical Christians, many of whom I think would be open to our ideas based on what their perception of what we represent truly is. If you'd like to comment on how those of a liberty perspective could sort of make inroads with evangelical Christians, it's a huge part of the Republican Party.
Yes, I think the first thing is to understand their worldview, and that when you're speaking to anyone who's a faith, I would say, I would probably, if I was speaking to a Muslim or a Mormon, I would do it the same way. But you have to understand that to a person of faith, their filter and their priority is the idea that God listens to their call, and that is going to be their filter for everything that you say. So when you begin to present or frame your position or your argument in a way that they interpret as offensive or could not align with that worldview, they're going to immediately put their defenses up and shut you down. So I think one of the first ways is through understanding their worldview and then having mutual respect to step into a conversation with that person for a civil dialogue. And that would be the first thing. And then you can break it down further on an issue basis, and each one of those things you'll have to frame the issue slightly different. But it's very, you could look to somebody like Rand Paul, who's positioning the liberty message very well. And if you really focus on his words, and you hear the libertarian message loud and clear. But if you just sort of scan over them or breeze over them, you can kind of misinterpret or feel like maybe he's misleading this movement. So I think words matter. This is one of the things that I sort of champion constantly, is that words matter, and how you frame those, or how you use those words and how you define those words matter. Sometimes in the evangelical community, especially, they have adopted definitions of words that are not accurate. Conservatism, liberal, these sort of hot button things, and so you have to be very careful as soon as you begin talking about conservatism that they understand what traditional conservatism is, or what traditional liberalism is, and so you can kind of dissect these things. But that's an understanding and mutual respect for the first argument. And then,
so I'm not wrong to think that it's not disagreement on issues, it's how you message and understand.
Absolutely correct.
Well, let me ask you, Jim, you mentioned during your opening statement, there are a lot of aspects of Mormonism that lend itself to libertarianism already. As you said, you've discovered, my girlfriend, wherever she is, comes from a Mormon family. The private welfare system they have in Utah, for example, Murray Rothbard, I think, wrote about this. It's a very libertarian, private, non-governmental charity thing. That's one example that comes to mind. Explain to people maybe how, Mormonism or LDS intersects with libertarianism, and what you found in making inroads within that community.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So, fundamental. So the belief in liberty, or the philosophy of libertarianism, goes back to the very foundation of why we believe we're here on this earth. As Latter-day Saints, we believe that we existed before this life in what we call the premortal birth life. We were spirits, though. So we looked similar, but we didn't have bodies that were physical. We believed that we were spiritual beings. And we believed at that time that we were given we were presented a plan, and there was a choice presented to us by Christ, or Jesus, and then there's a plan presented by Satan. And the choice given to us by Christ was we would come down on this earth, and we'd be free to live our lives as we best saw fit. And we should try to follow the laws of Heavenly Father, but that we wouldn't be forced to do it. Satan presented the plan that we would be forced to return back to heaven again. And his Heavenly Father's plan was that we would be free. That's it. We believe that's an eternal principle. And we believe that everyone who chose to follow Christ's plan was given the opportunity to come down on this earth and given a body to continue their progression back to heaven again and becoming like Heavenly Father. Those who chose to follow Satan were cast out and not given the opportunity to continue their purpose. So that's very foundational to our belief, and any Latter-day Saint should recognize that. And then how that ties into is we believe that now that we're on this road, that very same principle of agency or freedom to choose should continue as well. And I believe that since in the last life, an important component of us progressing and continuing onward was whether we chose freedom or not. The same thing applies to this life. That if we want to continue onward, continue our progression back to heaven again, then we need to be strong defenders of liberty as well. And we should seek to live moral lives, but in order to encourage people to live those moral lives, we should do it through voluntary means, and not through ever using force or coercion or the government. So that's basically why I'm so passionate about spreading the message of liberty within the RLC.
And my question for Will, and this is as much a political question as it is a religion or faith question. I remember being at the Iowa straw poll and seeing people who were dressed what I would think Muslims would dress like. And I'm like, okay, you're in Iowa, what's going on here? It was a good number. And it was explained to me, I was working for the Ron Paul campaign at the time, well, they're here to vote for Ron Paul. And there was a good line of them. And it was basically, these were very conservative people who found a Republican who they didn't think hated Muslims, was basically the perception, and it worked. So that's what I'd like to ask you, not only your faith and how it relates to the liberty message, but as a political question, how many Muslims are there in the United States who would rather vote for a Republican that's more libertarian in his message and his bent, and not for the Democrat or not for the conventional Republican? How well can this benefit us in the future, making those relationships?
Well, as far as the relation, I guess the first thing would be the Machacek. The Machacek is they're a set of 5 foundational principles, the reasonings behind law in the Islamic legal tradition, and they're spelled out and very succinctly. The protection of life. No one has the right to unduly aggress against your person. They don't have a right to harm you in any way except for in self-defense. The right to the protection of intellect. You have the ability to think and reason for oneself. The protection of religious liberty. That anything that comes between you and the divine should be eliminated. There should never be anything that comes between a man or woman and their ability to access the divine. The fourth one is the protection of private property. And that's fairly central to the liberty messages. The protection of property. No man has the right to unduly take your property by force. It's yours. It belongs to you. There's a communal property that can't come to you in taxes. Would be one thing that I would say would be taking a force of one's property. So with these foundational principles as the basis of law, if a law does not protect property, it does not protect life, it does not protect faith, it doesn't protect the intellect. If it doesn't protect these things, then it doesn't have a purpose for existing. Basically, there's no victim, there's no crime. And the protection of lineage, you have the right to protect your family. That's the fourth one. Which is another one that I think that the liberty movement would be in tune with, especially our view on the Second Amendment, that we have the right to protect our family, both from tyranny and from, theft. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is quoted as saying in a famous hadith that the greatest jihad is to speak a word of truth before a tyrant. To stand and speak your mind and speak what's true, even in the face of death or adversity from a criminal leader. So these being central in classical Islamic understanding was actually what brought me to the liberty movement, was the fact that I saw that since these were central to our understanding of what's right and what's just, and they were also central to the understanding of the liberty movement of what was right and what was just, the relationship was just waiting to happen.
And other Muslims who believe in those principles, I mean, we kind of see studies, African Americans vote with this bloc, or Asian Americans vote with this bloc, Hispanics. Where do Muslims lean politically? I don't know. I'm asking in America.
Historically, up until 2004, Muslims voted in a supermajority for the Republican Party. The family values, free markets, all of these things exist in the Islamic tradition. So up until the Iraq War, Muslims voted in a supermajority for the Republican Party. And then around 2007, I won't say during the George Bush era because that's not true. 2007, about a year before Obama was elected, cottage industry sprang up within the right, that their entire profit motive was to attack, demean, degrade the Muslim community. And they do so from a conservative Tea Party Republican platform. Our candidates are happy to share a stage with them. Our candidates are happy to go to their events that they sponsor, sign their books. Representative Sue Myrick, who later has come out and said she was conned by this group into being involved, wrote the opening for one of their books, and then here about a year ago came out and said that she was basically hornswoggled by these people.
So you're saying they basically voted bloc Republican until about 2007, 2008. That's interesting.
And now voting bloc Democrat has become a survival instinct rather than something that they're doing.
Okay, so that's not good. We're going to do something about that. We are running a little late in our schedule today. We're going to have plenty more time for this panel. Let's start taking questions from you guys. I'm sure you have some questions for any of the panelists up here. I think that'd be the most interesting and fun way to do this. Does anybody have any questions for any of the panelists? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question on the principle of helping the poor. Until the 19th century, in the UK and the US, we had the private charity system. And people accepted that God would provide for the poor through the private charity system, even though not everybody gave. But there would, among those who gave, there would be sufficient for the poor. And the only places in the world today where the private charity system is relied upon is in some of the Islamic countries, not all of them. Some of them the government has taken over the distribution of zakat to the poor. That's what they claim.
Yeah.
Right. So I think the loss of capacity to believe in the power of goodness has turned us to the state to provide for the poor, and what has been the result is an increase in poverty. So I'd like the speakers to
That's a very good question, not only from a faith perspective, but anybody in this room can relate to the fact when you're talking to liberals about, this is why libertarianism or liberty perspective is better than your average, Republican perspective. They say, oh, well, poor people are going to be starving in the streets, and you have to have free this and free that. So you have both angles, but if any of you would like to answer this question.
Well, the first thing is that force obfuscates sincerity. That's the argument that I always use against liberals when they say, oh, well, you hate the poor, or you're greedy, or we love the poor because we want to give to them. Well, there's nothing sincere or charitable about taking from Peter to give to Paul. To put a gun into my face or this gentleman's face or someone else's face in the name of charity, it's no longer charity. Once you involve force, once you say, okay, you have to give me this, or I'm going to lock you in a rape cage, or I'm going to shoot you, or I'm going to aggressively against you in some way, it's now something you're doing under duress. It's no longer a charitable action that is real. And on one of the points that he made, this idea with the modern concept of separation of church and state, which most people would agree is not the original constitutional concept. And the separating of the two is we've allowed the society as a whole, and even conservatives that I've spoken with, have lost this concept that rights come from God, not from paper. Rights don't come from government. They come from God. And because of the secularization of society, and specifically of the state itself, we as a society have lost that idea that government does not give us those rights. Government does not do charity. Government does not do these things. These are the work of God. These are things that are natural, that are given to you simply by being born. And until we get that, we right the moral train, so to speak, that's skewed off the tracks, I don't think we're ever going to be able to really fix that.
Justin or Jeremy?
Regarding the issue of the poor, I think this is one of the things that American Liberty Association is trying to do, and that is to not only challenge government and the civil society, but also challenge the charitable societies and the church as a whole. In other words, I think that there's some quid pro quo that needs to happen, that the complacency of the church, they need to be shaken out of that. So one of the things when I'm talking about libertarian issues to evangelicals, people of faith, is I say, where is the church, and why are you not speaking out, or why are you not doing these things? Now that ties then to 501c3 status and the Fed, which is what we all love, correct? So the idea that your premise was that essentially that the church faltered or that charity faltered, and so it turned society to a civil government. I would probably argue that the civil government forced its hand with regulation, and therefore the church then became lulled into a state of complacency. So I think the idea that it was the church's complacency first, I don't think that's accurate, and so I would probably challenge that premise as a whole.
Yeah, and I'll just answer briefly the question. I think it is a very important question. How do you address that? And as I talk to my different friends who consider themselves to be more compassionate, the question always is, but who's going to fill the void? Will charity, voluntary charity, will churches really step up and help all these poor people? And the answer is that I think most of us would agree with, that if the government wasn't so involved, the need for charity wouldn't be so great. So there wouldn't be as much demand for it. The supply would certainly meet the need. But the question is, how do you actually get there? It's kind of a reliance on how do you convince someone that that's true? And I think it's difficult, and you got to do it individually. My perspective is, especially when I'm talking to those of my faith, is it goes back to, I think, having faith in God. That Heavenly Father does not want us to use force, like Will was saying, to make.
From a Muslim, and I'm a non-Christian as well. I'm not a Muslim. I'm a secular humanist in the Republican Party, which is a very hard thing to be right now. But how do you perceive we can work with bringing other people into the party who do not walk in step with the evangelical base of the Republican Party?
Well, when the Democrats kicked out the KKK, black people finally started voting for them. That's the easiest, that's the simplest way to do it is, okay, you people advocate violence against a portion of our society based on their faith tradition. Well, that's not compatible with liberty. We reject you. I went to an event in Atlanta last month where they had a guy that they thought that was a liberty advocate. He had a Freedom Fighter Radio or Patriot Fighter Radio or something like that. But when you go to his website, it is one advocation of violence against people that he disagrees with after another. He's got a target of a guy dressed in a turban and a thobe, and he sells targets of Muslims for target practice. Now, on his website, directly below that, he has a picture of my 2-year-old and 3-year-old son with a little box that says "Future Terrorist Bombers." Yeah.
This is just some activist where you live?
He lives in Atlanta. He runs a radio show.
I don't want to make this too personal, but that's crazy.
He was disinvited from the Liberty Movement event because of the fact that he was advocating violence. Now, he turned that around into absolute insanity and attacking the Liberty Movement. And that's the problem, is when we ostracize these people, when we tell people that advocate violence or who purposely create division in our society, you know what? Your message is polluting our message. They go into complete and total hysteria, media, television, print, and do everything that they can to attack anyone who dares speak out against their message. They have names and slurs and everything else for that. So basically the movement has to be willing to deal with that. Is the movement willing to be put down by other conservatives for standing for its principles?
I think we've already crossed that bridge.
On this particular issue, we're not always. I see libertarian activists in Florida advocating a religion test for citizenship. I've seen, these are self-professed libertarians, they were libertarian organizations, and they're advocating that we target people that they disagree with based on faith or political persuasion. So we're not all in sync on whether or not we're willing to put those people out of the party, or at least say we don't accept their message.
Well, if y'all will address the question as well.
I think that the evangelical, the idea, one of the things you have to sort of present in speaking with them, in sort of contrary to that, okay, is this idea of real Christianity, that violence, like you say, is never, that's not part of that religion. It's it's a misconstrued idea of what evangelical Christianity really is. That's something that the media perpetuates. That's something that gets done over and over in the academia and those sort of circles. So I think just from a libertarian perspective, that's a very, that's something that you need to be against, not necessarily just from your concern to reach out to them, but also from the idea that words do matter. You're saying that this is what Christianity is, but that's not Christianity. Christianity is something else. And to your point, if they're advocating violence, or if they're advocating certain things, or if they're speaking in hate or being evil to these people, or whatever, however you want to judge it and do it yourself, they shouldn't be there. Like they, they are not representing, or walking out what they're saying they believe. And so that's a hypocrite. And even in the party, I would say to people that don't espouse our platform, you're in the wrong party. Like, why are you here? Why are you a Republican thing? So.
Well, just let me add, Jeremy, we'll get to your response. Like, even your question started off, well, the Tea Party is this. Well, no, it's actually a bunch of different things. Evangelicals are a bunch of different things. Muslims are a bunch of different things. You can't say that this group is just this. I think that's unfair from a secular perspective, a religious perspective, a political perspective. But let's let Jeremy respond.
Well, may I just put one quick little anecdote of this? At our state convention last year, we had Republican fundraisers selling infidel hats.
That's horrible. I mean, we all agree. I hope everybody in this room agrees that that's horrible.
But
that doesn't represent everybody in the Tea Party.
We had the very first Tea Party radio show by name in the U.S. was run by an Arab Christian and a Muslim.
Yeah, I'm not trying to lump everybody in. I'm saying the evangelical base, how they're not outraged by that, and from an evangelical and from an LDS person, how do you speak to these people and say, how do you let this stand? Why are you not, turning this thing over?
But how do you know that they're not? How do you know that they're not enraged? Like, how do you? I mean, I guess this is the issue. Are you talking to them? Are you at the churches? Are you there saying, can you believe this just happened? Like, this is wrong. Because when I'm there and I'm talking to them, they do say that. They say this is not right. This is wicked. This is. I mean, they've got all their words for it, but they do ostracize themselves from that behavior, right?
I think a lot of these questions come down to leadership.
Yeah, when we have
If
Robert Spencer speak at a church for $25 a head, a pastor invites someone who advocates violence against a specific set of our society and literally makes money off of smearing them every day. That's his job. When that happens, we don't see Republican leaders go out and say, I would never go to that church.
Exactly.
And that's a problem. We have no leadership that's willing to be the one to stand up and say, that's wrong, because there might be political fallout from that. You may have a Louis Gohmert or an Alan West come after you if you stand up and say, that's wrong.
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, my perspective is, in the last election, there was a question, will the evangelical base get behind Mitt Romney in the reform next season? And, I certainly don't think Mormons are picked on as much as Muslims. More picked on than us.
But they are number two.
But coming up to, my response was, well, I don't think you should vote for Mitt Romney, but it shouldn't be because he's Mormon, because he stands for all these terrible issues.
There you go.
But how do we get over that? I think it's important to have a panel like this. You can have a Muslim, evangelical Christian, a Mormon, and a secular humanist, and maybe get a Jewish person up here and show that based upon our fundamental beliefs and what drives us, and we can all get to this. We can form a coalition, and although we might have different individual beliefs, we can all come together to advance the cause of freedom and the cause of liberty.
I have very good friends who are evangelicals, and I have people who I absolutely despise as enemies who are evangelicals. I have friends who are atheists and non-believers, and I know people I absolutely despise who are atheists and non-believers. And each group has good and bad. I think it's always important.
And that is true libertarianism right there.
Yeah, and to me, I'm Christian. I was not raised really in a religious household. My parents are fairly agnostic. I don't even know if they would even describe it. That's part of our message, is that we can bring people together under this umbrella tent of liberty. Mm-hmm. And nobody really else, the left certainly doesn't have that. They are very intolerant in many ways, and some more conventionally conservative people. I'm a conservative, but many of them are intolerant ways. We have a special message where we can bring people under a big tent. Let's get a few more questions. I know we're running. Yes, sir. And then I'll get to you next.
It's kind of building on the previous question. I'll keep it brief because I want to hear your comments. In Washington, during the primaries, we had relatively good success forming coalitions with the grassroots Santorum supporters. in trying to block Romney from getting a majority of delegates until Santorum dropped out. They may have led with other issues, but regardless of what Santorum's positions were himself, the grassroots people were really for small government. But now that the figures are out of the way, and particularly with the growing chapter of the RLC in Washington, social issues have come up as a real divisive kind of issue. We had our state convention a couple weeks ago, and there was a proposed resolution that the Washington State RLC take a very explicit hardline position against abortion. And although probably 90% or more of our membership identifies as pro-life, it was a very difficult and heated debate. And the thing that was troubling to me is that the proponents of this resolution tended to speak in terms of, if we oppose this resolution, if we speak against it, then we are not with God individually, and as an organization, we are evil. And what has happened, we're murderers. All
Just
of these
basically
things.
a statement litmus test that they wanted to impose. If you didn't agree with it, then
Yes.
You are literally murderers, cowards, and liars.
But what's happened since it was defeated now is that these people are blogging and publicly calling for pro-life people to disavow the RLC and to form something else, which may be the appropriate thing. But I'm just curious about, since the majority of our remaining membership does identify as pro-life, and you could extend this to issues whether it was gay marriage or other things where you may have a particular religious belief.
Sure.
How do we reconcile that within the liberty movement, within the RLC, so that we can move forward and accomplish something?
So tomorrow with the Ladies of Liberty, we'll be talking more specifically about how to position issues to evangelicals. So not to get too far in the weeds there, but there is definite messaging to go through that. Honestly, I love talking about abortion and gay marriage and some of these very hot button issues with evangelicals, because when you begin to reframe the way that it's presented, it is really about, a lot of times, and I think the liberty movement has the opportunity to be leaders in this area. We have the chance to reframe the context of the debate and the dialogue that's been happening in society, in American society. And I think that as we begin to do that, as we cause people to think through these things, on a logical level, and we begin to diffuse the emotion and bring down the walls of defense, that people can think logically, and we can begin to unite and in our disagreement. In other words, when you talk about the history of the United States, our states became states because there were all these different sects of religion that wanted to govern their own communities the way they wanted to. They didn't want a strong federal government because, well, there were some that advocated that, but ultimately it failed because they were sort of skeptical of each other. They said, I don't necessarily trust you in what you're doing over there because I don't understand you, and that's probably just a lack of understanding. So I'm not saying I distrust Will or Jeremy, but the idea is that skepticism is what helps keep the government small and allow us to have a Republican government. Now, they said we do need some form. It is a necessary evil. So that's part of the sort of anarchist idea. And I think we like to use that phrase loosely, but again, anarchy ends in tyranny. So I don't think any of us are advocating that either. But sorry, going on a trail here. But the point of that is taking the opportunity as liberty people to reframe the dialogue, to reframe the premise of that debate, the life debate specifically, to say, we're not necessarily wanting to define life, because that's a moral decision as to where you define life. But we want to talk about when are rights guaranteed under the Constitution conferred on an individual. It's a very different conversation than saying we need to define life. So when you begin to take leadership in movement of how you frame that argument, how you frame that debate, that's when you can start to have the dialogue and pull out evangelicals or Muslims or any of us to find out where the areas of agreement are, to build your coalition and become stronger. So.
We will be successful to the extent that we can convince people of faith that embracing liberty or libertarianism does not mean rejecting your values. It means approaching them in a different way than you have in the past. It's not getting rid of them. It's a new approach, and I would argue probably a more effective approach if you care about those issues. That's the trick. Let's take one more question. We're all running a little late. This gentleman right here.
Going forward, I guess, the problem of welfare culture, people being born into a welfare entitlement, entitled culture. I should be provided for this or that, or the government is big and has all this money and can provide. To me, that's a cultural it's a misunderstanding of the culture has that misunderstanding, that teaches this misunderstanding, and of course, as I assume we all know, that spirals down into nobody's producing and whatnot. You get all into a discussion there, but that whole cultural thing to me is the main problem, and the solution to which is to re-educate, or to begin educating. That's what we often try to do around the folks that I know, is educate. Hey, you don't understand that property rights, that freedom, that true economic incentives make a difference. My question really is, and maybe you just don't agree with me, but I assume mostly you would. Each of you, what are your respective groups doing now and in the future to affect this type of re-education? Not specifically, obviously, that you would have a program designed for it, but I would hope that you would have some type of program that's a parallel of that.
We'd all like to see welfare abolished, and I would like to see it go back into the hands of faith-based organizations. That's what it was beforehand. I think that's sort of what you're getting at. Each of you like to respond.
We have an article and a video out called "What About the Poor." It catalogs the life of a gentleman in, I think he was in San Francisco. They called him the best-dressed shoe shiner in San Francisco. I actually posted this on your Facebook page about a year ago. And basically it talks about this guy, and he was basically a drunk homeless man who had no money and no job, and who raised himself up by his own bootstraps to start his own shoe shine business, to got himself off of alcohol, bought himself a nice shirt, and to get himself off of the streets, because this man had fallen through the social safety net in the most pinko city and the most pinko state in the entire country. Somehow poor people and homeless people fall through the cracks. Imagine that. And basically what happened was that as he pulled himself up, the media took notice, and that was the worst possible thing that could have happened to him, because immediately after that, a state bureaucrat showed up to help him and to help us, and told him that he needed a $600 and some odd sidewalk vendor's permit to be able to shine shoes on the side of the road. So all of his savings that he had saved up to get himself off the street was then taken by a government bureaucrat. So what we do is we take stories like this and we introduce them to people. We show this stuff to people. The easiest way to help the poor is to get out of the way of letting them help themselves.
Exactly.
The concept that force obfuscates sincerity. Once force is involved, it's no longer charitable giving. We go out and we push these ideas within our community. We push these ideas to other communities, and we try to create an educational format around that, to try to help people understand that, charity is great. And I love charity. I think it's the most amazing thing ever. I've had to be the recipient of charity in my lifetime, and I received charity from a mosque. I moved. I had nowhere to go. They wrote me a $500 check because I had nowhere to go. And that was how I got on my feet. That's how I ended up in this chair in this room here today. Was that $500 donation set me on a journey that put me here. I didn't need the government to do that. I did that on my own. With my work and the help of other people and the work of other people, we put everything together. And we try to present that to everyone we know as the proper way to get things done. And it's all about educating people. If you can show people that, well, your way, the question is, oh, well, if we do it with private charity, people will fall through the cracks. Well, if we do it with public charity, it happens the same way. You have to point out the fact that their arguments are completely irrational. The thing that they're arguing for is also the thing that they're arguing against at the same time. And you have to be able to spell that out in a way that it doesn't make them feel like you're slapping them in the face.
Sure. The American Liberty Association has